Right now, somewhere in a museum basement, there is a small stone figure small enough to fit in your palm. No face, exaggerated hips, heavy breasts, a body carved by someone who lived 25,000 years ago and left behind no explanation whatsoever. Archaeologists have spent over a century arguing about what it means. And here's the thing, they still don't know, but what they've found around it, beneath it, alongside thousands of other objects just like it, across 3 continents and tens of thousands of years, tells a story about what the human mind reaches for when it tries to understand something larger than itself. The question of what prehistoric people actually worshipped is one of the most contested and fascinating in all of human science. And the answer, or the closest thing we have to one, changes how you think about where religion came from in the first place. I start with the oldest evidence, because the oldest evidence isn't what most people expect. It isn't a temple or a shrine or a carved idol. It's a grave, around 130,000 years ago, long before any cave painting, long before any figurine. Humans began burying their dead in individual graves, not just dropping bodies and walking away. Deliberately, bodies positioned in sleeping postures, sometimes curled on their sides, objects placed alongside them, stone tools, animal bones, red ochre, a mineral pigment the color of blood, rubbed into the skin or scattered over the remains. The earliest undisputed Homo sapiens burial dates to roughly 60,000 years ago at a site called Kafze in Israel. The skeletons there were stained with ochre, and that detail matters more than almost anything else archaeologists have found. Because ochre doesn't preserve food, it doesn't sharpen a blade. The only reason to coat a dead body in red pigment is symbolic. It means something. What it meant exactly, nobody can say with certainty. But the act of doing it at all suggests that these people believe something waited on the other side of death, something worth preparing for. Then come the caves. Between roughly 40,000 and 15,000 years ago, humans across Europe and parts of Asia began crawling deep into cave systems, sometimes hundreds of meters underground, where no natural light reached, and painting the walls. Horses, bison, aurochs, woolly rhinos, animals rendered with a precision and energy that still stops people cold when they see them for the first time. The famous caves at Lascaux in France, Altamira in Spain, Chauvet, which pushes the record back to around 36,000 years ago. But here's what's fascinating. These paintings weren't made at cave entrances where people lived. They were made deep inside, in the darkest chambers, in places that required effort and risk to reach. The artists carried fat-burning lamps into passages where they had to crawl on their stomachs. They painted on ceilings 12 feet overhead. Some images are layered on top of older images across thousands of years, as if the location itself was sacred and kept being returned to. Whatever was happening in those caves, it wasn't decoration. The most compelling interpretation is shamanism, and that word gets thrown around loosely, so it's worth being precise about what the evidence actually suggests. In 1988, archaeologists David Lewis Williams and Thomas Dowson published a paper proposing what they called the neuropsychological model. The argument was this: when the human brain enters certain altered states, whether from rhythmic drumming, fasting, oxygen deprivation, or psychoactive plants, it produces a predictable sequence of visual hallucinations. Geometric phosphenies first, then tunnels, then vivid figurative images of animals and hybrid creatures, and the imagery painted on Paleolithic cave walls matches those stages with striking consistency. The animal-human hybrid figures appear again and again. A figure in the Chauvet cave with a bison head and human legs, the Fami. Our sorcerer at Les Trois Frères, a creature that is part stag, part owl, part human. Lewis Williams argued these weren't imaginative inventions. They were records of what people saw inside their own minds during trance states and believed were real encounters with the spirit world. The shamanic framework fits the archaeological record in another way too. In living hunter-gatherer cultures studied by anthropologists, the shaman is the person who crosses the boundary between the visible world and the spirit world on behalf of the community. The cave itself, in this interpretation, was that boundary. The rock wall wasn't a canvas, it was a membrane. The animals painted on it weren't representations of animals the hunters hoped to kill. They were spirits being contacted or released. Deep underground, in the dark, with a small lamp guttering against the silence, the person making those marks may have believed they were reaching through the stone into another realm entirely. That framework, wild as it sounds, is now the dominant hypothesis among researchers who specialize in Paleolithic religion. Then there are the figurines, more than 200 of them discovered so far, spread across Europe and into Siberia, carved between roughly 40,000 and 10,000 years ago, small enough to carry, made from limestone, ivory, fired clay, even mammoth bone. The most famous is the Venus of Willendorf, found in Austria in 1908 and dated to approximately 25,000 BCE. It is 4.4 inches tall. The hips are wide, the breasts are heavy and pendulous. There are no facial features. The head tilts slightly downward and is covered in what appear to be rows of braided hair, or possibly a woven cap, and the entire surface was originally coated in red ochre, the same pigment found in the graves. Archaeologist Maria Gimbutas spent decades arguing that figurines like this one were evidence of a widespread prehistoric goddess religion, a mother goddess who presided over fertility, birth, and regeneration across the ancient world. Her theory was enormously influential and remains genuinely contested. Critics point out that the figurines vary too much across time and geography to represent a single unified belief system. Some are fat, some are slender, some are clearly female, others are ambiguous. The idea that 30,000 years of figurine making across 3 continents all points to one goddess requires a level of cultural continuity that's hard to defend. But here's the part nobody resolves cleanly. All the competing theories have real evidence behind them. The fertility symbol interpretation makes sense for some figurines in some contexts. The self-portrait hypothesis, proposed by archaeologist Leroy McDermott in 1996, argues that the distorted proportions of many figurines, the oversized torsos and absent feet, match the visual perspective of a pregnant woman looking down at her own body without a mirror. That's not nothing. The grandmother goddess reading makes sense in the context of matrilineal societies. The traveling amulet theory makes sense when you consider how portable the objects are. The honest answer is that we're looking at 30,000 years of human artistic production across an entire continent and projecting backward from the debris. These objects almost certainly meant different things to different people in different times. What they share is the impulse to make them at all. That impulse is the thing worth examining. What all of this evidence, the graves, the caves, the figurines, points toward is something archaeologists call animism, the belief that the world is populated by spirits, that animals carry souls, that rivers and mountains and storms are not just physical things, but inhabited things, that the boundary between the living and the dead is permeable. Modern hunter-gatherer groups studied across the 20th century, from the San of the Kalahari to the Aboriginal Australians to the Siberian Evenki, practice variations of this worldview. And because these groups represent the closest living analogies to Paleolithic human societies, their beliefs have been used carefully, cautiously, as a mirror for what the archaeological evidence might mean. The San, for instance, enter trance states during healing dances and describe traveling through a spirit world populated by animals. Their rock art looks strikingly similar to Paleolithic European cave paintings made tens of thousands of miles and years away. The neuropsychological model suggests this isn't coincidence. It's the same human brain producing the same visions under the same conditions across all of human history. Around 12,000 years ago, something shifted. The Neolithic Revolution. Humans stopped following herds and started planting seeds. Settled communities replaced nomadic bands, and religion changed with the landscape. The most dramatic evidence of this transition sits in southeastern Turkey at a site called Göbekli Tepe. It was built approximately 11,600 years ago, which means it predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the Egyptian pyramids by more than 7,000. It is the oldest known example of monumental architecture on Earth, and it was almost certainly a religious site. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing 20 tons, arranged in circular enclosures and carved with animals. Foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes, aurochs. No evidence of permanent habitation nearby. No grain storage, no houses. The people who built it gathered there apparently for ritual purposes only. The scale of coordination required to quarry, transport, and erect those pillars is staggering. It suggests organized communal religious practice on a level that hadn't previously been thought possible for pre-agricultural societies. What Göbekli Tepe may actually show is the reverse of the conventional story. For decades, the accepted sequence was agriculture first, then surplus food, then specialization, then religion. Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite might be true. That religion, specifically the shared need to gather and perform communal ritual, may have driven the social organization that eventually made agriculture possible. Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who excavated the site from 1994 until his death in 2014, argued that the need to feed the workers who built and maintained Göbekli Tepe may have created the first incentive to cultivate grain intentionally rather than just harvest it wild. If he was right, then organized religion didn't follow civilization. It preceded it. It was the mechanism that created the conditions civilization required. That reframing is still debated. But the stones are real, and they're 11,600 years old, and they were put there on purpose. Once agriculture took hold, the religious shift accelerated. Settled communities depended on harvests, and harvests depended on rain, sun, and soil fertility. The abstract spirit world of the cave painters gave way to something more structured: grain gods, seasonal liturgical calendars tied to planting and harvest cycles, deities associated with rivers and flooding. The shift from animism to what historians call nature religion, and eventually to full polytheism, tracked the shift from a world humans moved through to a world humans tried to control. Ancestor veneration grew alongside this. When you have land to pass down, the ancestors who cleared that land become sacred figures. The dead acquire property rights. Neolithic burial sites across Europe show increasingly elaborate grave goods. Social hierarchies reflected in who gets buried, how, and evidence of communal monuments built to honor collective ancestors rather than individuals. The Venus of Willendorf is still sitting in the Natural History Museum in Vienna. She has no face, no feet, no name. She was made by someone whose name is also gone, in a world without writing, without cities, without anything we would recognize as civilization. But that person looked at the same sky and the same uncertainty and reached for the same thing humans have been reaching for ever since: a way to hold the uncontrollable, a shape to give to the forces that decided whether the hunt succeeded, whether the child survived, whether the snow finally ended in spring. The specific beliefs changed, the architecture changed, the gods changed names and faces across 10,000 generations. What didn't change was the reaching.